No, no, don't worry. I tend to go into a story and start drifting off into loads of other stories. So I've got two, so I'm being a bit sort of, my tingles go a little bit more than one song. Okay. Actually, the other day, the song Oobla Dee Oobla Da by the Beatles came on. Oobla Dee Oobla Da, life goes on, boy. La 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 la, life goes on. I used to cut hair, 19 years old. I'm a Beatles fan and I'm a Queen's Park Rangers fan who happened to be in Shepherd's Bush. We used to wash Jane Ash's hair, and when I became a stylist at Vidal Sassoon at 19, after a couple of occasions, she said to me, and one of the things we used to do is never sort of ask about who her boyfriend was because we don't really talk about it. And she never spoke about it. But anyway, I finished her hair on a Saturday morning, November 1966. And she said to me, when I finished her hair, Leslie, what are you doing this afternoon? Can I ask you what you're doing this afternoon? Well, I was going to football in the afternoon. And she said, have you got time to cut my boyfriend's hair? Now, we all know who the boyfriend is. And I said, yes, of course I've got time to cut your boyfriend's hair, knowing that Paul McCartney was her boyfriend. And my sister's got Paul McCartney photos all over the wall. And I happen to be a Beatle fan as well. So we arranged that I would go around there late in the afternoon and I pack up my bags and my blow dryer, scissors and comb. So she wrote down on a piece of paper, number, I won't say the number, but Cavendish Avenue. And I went, Jane, I said, that's my surname. And she said, well, maybe it was meant. Well, yes, Jane, it was meant because at 90 years old, I'm going around to cut one of the most famous heads in the hair. I went to see Paul, drove around to Paul's house. If anyone knows that part of the world, it's behind Lord's Cricket Ground in London, St John's Wood. I drove up, I stood outside, parked the car on the opposite side thinking, wow. And as I pressed the bell and I'm sort of gathering my thoughts, McCartney opens the door and says, hello, Leslie. He said, Jane's told me all about you. Would you like to come in? Would you like a cup of tea? So within the next 2 minutes of this bell pressing, I'm having tea with Paul McCartney, which is a bit surreal. There's a dog running around. There's all mad, there's hair everywhere, and there's this dog called Martha, who ends up being Martha, my dear. You know, lovely song, named after his old English sheepdog. I sit down and we have some tea, which is, I'm looking at him. And that's actually when I said to him, what you're doing, because the Beatles have sort of stopped playing live after Candlestick Park in August 1966 in San Francisco. That was their last gig they ever did. So he was at home, and the timing is right when you do things in life. You know, he wasn't coming into the salon. I'm actually at his home. Then said to him, right, Paul, how do you want your hair? And he said, which is great, and all the Beatles said it, you do it as you see it. But I wanted to sort of, what do I talk about? So I said to Paul, after I finished his hair, have you written anything lately? And like any person that's excited about writing something down, and I'm at his home in his front room with a psychedelic piano, and he said, listen to this. And he went, oobla dee, oobla da, life goes on, boy, la 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 la, life goes on. Now, you've got to picture this. In 1967, I think that's when it was written, that didn't sound like a Beatles song. It just sounded like someone was just playing on the piano going da-da-da, 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 da. So, you know, it's like a little ditty. Eventually, when the album came out, what comes out? Oobla dee, oobla da, life goes on. Now, but it was very exciting, you know, to suddenly, you know, people listen to music on the radio, it does things to them. And I could still see McCartney just playing this song to me. The weirdest thing about it was that I left Cavendish Avenue after having tea there, which was very nice, singing Oobla Dee Oobla Da. Never thought in a million years that it would be something that people would be singing about. The other song was When I'm 64. Now, why was that? I think in the early days, it was McCartney's, one of the first songs he wrote, believe it or not, when he was about 15, 16. And the reason it came out on that album was that his father was 64, although he had written it years before. But in the line is, when I get older, losing my hair. Now, you know, that obviously struck a chord, hair. And McCartney's hair is actually really good. And I seem to think I tended to think at the same time that my hair was pretty good. And I remember talking to him and saying, Paul, that particular song, When I'm 64, When You Get Old and Grey, I can assure you now that you won't lose your hair. If I think about it, I don't think I'll lose mine. I then get another phone call about 2 weeks later. Now, it was a strange time because Paul didn't need his hair cutting or blow drying, but they were having a bit of a disagreement within the Beatles, without me knowing, but there was a bit of tension there. Anyway, I said to Paul, I haven't seen Jane for a while. And he said, no, she's away filming. She was at the Bristol or Vic. And I said, I suppose that now that you're not touring anymore, you'll go down and see her. And he said, no. He said, if I go down there, the questions would just be, when the Beatles are getting back together again, or are you talking to John, or what you're doing, whatever. So I don't do that. I said, well, that's a shame. And I said, and I'm still doing his hair. And I said, I suppose when she's finished filming, you go on holiday with her. He said, can't do that. Paparazzi will be there. Same questions. As I'm combing his hair back, now I've got the privilege, because his hair was wet at the time, I combed it all off his face. And I said, that's a shame. Why do you go in disguise? I didn't know what I meant by disguise. I was probably thinking costume. And he said, how? And as I was picking his hair up, I said, why don't I cut all your hair off? Now, you've got to remember, this guy's got a Beatle haircut down to his shoulders, and I'm talking about cutting all his hair off. I sort of said it as a joke. And he looked at me in the mirror in his bathroom and said, go on, do it. I said, you serious? He said, yes. So I proceeded to start cutting his hair from the back, because you don't do it from the front because it's too much of a shock. And I worked it around until you come to the famous ears. That's when you know you've had a short haircut, when you can see your ears. And I cut the hair all around his ears. And I proceeded to go to the top about half an inch long, maybe less than that, less than half inch. I finally finished, and his hair, no one would recognize him. At the same time, he was unshaven and he had a slight moustache. So, there was no need for him to look like a Beatle like he had to do for the last 5 years. I left after another cup of tea with him, and I thought to myself, okay, Leslie, you've had your fun. You've cut Paul McCartney's hair twice. You've now cut his hair so short that you're not going to be asked again. 5 weeks later, in the newspaper, there was a big article that said Paul McCartney had just come back from safari in Nairobi, Kenya, with his girlfriend, Jane Asher, and his road manager, Mal Evans. And when they got to the other end, which was then called London Airport, they pressed turned around to him and said, Paul, we didn't recognise you. Who cut your hair? And Mal Evans, the road manager, said, oh, his hairdresser, Leslie Cavendish. So I thank you, Mal, for doing that for me. And in the papers the following week, I've got the articles upstairs, and it says, the barber that made Paul a skinhead. Now, Paul McCartney is 81 plus. He's still got a great head of hair. I'm at the tender age, much younger than him, at 76. And I've still got my hair, so I was proved right. So I went to see McCartney at the Magical Mystery Tour film that we did, which I was in. I'm talking about 50 years later. And when we came out of the theatre, it was in London, it was a private showing, we sort of met, and we sort of said hello to each other. He remembered me, and I said, Paul, do you remember what I said to you all those years ago? And he said, no. And I pointed at his hair, and I said, I always told you that you'd never lose your hair. And I said, I wouldn't lose mine. And he said to me, you were correct. He said, you still got yours, and I still got mine. So when I'm 64 and oobla doobla da, it does send a little shiver through me. And I love it to this day. I never asked for what's his autograph. I never took a piece of their hair. As I get older, as they say, when I get to 64, I've had all these memories written down. I had the press cuttings to show that I wasn't dreaming this. So, that's it.
You get a haircut at all? No, thanks. I had one yesterday.